Graham, you're here this morning, bright and early. I suppose that comes from working with children. You have to be on the ball, don't you? You have to be on time.
Absolutely, yes.
Children can't wait. So what's your background?
My background from my working history is a lot of working with children and families. I used to work as a play worker with children with disabilities. I was a youth worker and a qualified mentor with challenging young people who were kind of getting excluded from secondary schools. So I have quite a long working background of helping children and their families and their parents kind of through difficult kind of conflict situations.
And so with that, I think you can do anything if you can do that.
Well, I like to think, I think I'm very intuitive with people, and I've got a lot of good kind of strong skills in terms of working with people and kind of helping people and being positive-minded about trying to work and improve situations.
And so you went through a divorce yourself, and that made you realise then that it could be done in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I got divorced in 2012, and it was the first time for me, and hopefully the last. But it was a challenging kind of time, and I think I was quite mindful that when I was going through that process, that quite often you can meet a lot of people who negatively prophesize that there's going to be a negative outcome because they've either got their own personal circumstances or they've heard that things might go negatively. And but I feel very positive about how I've kind of come through that process, and very I love helping people get through that process to a more positive ending.
And I can imagine your panic in your own divorce when you were given a court summons, and you only had 4 days to sort yourself out.
That's right. Yeah, that was quite a surprise to suddenly find out that suddenly I had to engage in a family court process at short notice. That was quite an interesting learning moment. But I feel that was something that over time I kind of coped very well with, and I learned how very quickly to figure out how family courts worked. And
now we have our friends, a legal profession, who come into our programme regularly, and we love them dearly. But in your case, you did find that you'd paid a very high fee for a barrister to just say, my client doesn't agree. Yeah,
that's right. So I think that first occasion, I'd kind of, in a bit of a panic, had a sort of direct access barrister, and it was kind of on reflection really that I realised that there wasn't anything massively complicated about what the barrister presented for me, and in hindsight I could have easily have communicated exactly what that person said on my behalf, and so it was at that moment I kind of realised that wasn't the way to go forward, and that actually I should kind of do some research and think about kind of presenting my own case, which I did to a successful outcome.
And Graham Fletcher, I'm looking at your website at the moment, and you talk about Divorce Day, because I've read up about this, and in fact in the past I've met solicitors who say they're gearing up for the first week back at work is always busy, people contacting them about divorce, which is really sad. So what have you written in your blog?
Well, what I've tried to sort of propose is with an awareness of it being Divorce Day, and I do know that myself and other clients that I've spoken to, they've kind of said that, it is a kind of common experience that sometimes people are getting to the start of a new year and they're making sort of decisions to separate. And what I was trying to do was put a positive sort of slant on that, really, that rather than thinking of it negatively, that you could see it as a positive start for a new journey for the new year, and that to view it positively, that this can be something that you can turn into a positive, as much as it will have difficult kind of emotions attached and be challenging for everybody, that it's really important to kind of have a healthy, positive thinking kind of attitude.
And it is. It might be positive for maybe the person that's instigating it, but not necessarily for the person that's the receiver.
Well, there can be that dynamic, can't there? But I think hopefully that would be an initial dynamic. I mean, hopefully that it could well be that in time the other person will recognise that, maybe that there's some aspects there that weren't working for them as well, and that hopefully both those people can work towards more productive kind of long-term say shared parenting relationship if they have children, because I think ultimately if there's children involved, then the ultimate aim has to be that the parents can somehow get on in the future for the sake of the children.
Now, as somebody who has cared for children in a professional way, you must have come across a lot of behavioural traits that are common to young children whose parents are at war, maybe, or going through divorce. Can you tell me the sort of things they get up to and the feelings that they have?
Well, it can be very, very, very difficult for children through that time, and sometimes there can be mixed emotions. Children can kind of pick up on parents' feelings at times, and that can be really kind of tricky. I think it can be very tricky for any parent who... I think for parents, sometimes their antenna to their children's feelings can be very over-amplified, and possibly reading into everything that a child does as being indicative of an impact of the divorce. And sometimes there's different explanations, and children are just going through whatever things that they're going through as well. So it is a really tricky balancing act, I think, as a parent, if you're trying to guide your children through that period of time as well.
Now, I remember very, very clearly things that happened to me through my divorce time, and I was very clear to make it to the children that it wasn't anything that they had done. It was all something to do with Mummy and Daddy, not them, that Daddy loved them and everything, so went through the whole process. But children do come to their own conclusions, don't they? And also friends, well-meaning friends. You might be trying to do the right thing, and then well-meaning friends can sometimes muck it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting how powerful friends and family can be at that kind of period in life. I feel very blessed that when I was about 18, my mum and dad separated, and they modelled to me a very positive way in which they went through divorce, and it was very amicable, and I always really respected that and valued that, and so I think that was really sort of something that was a real influence for me. But I do know that sometimes you can... Sometimes if other people have got, say, negative experiences, sometimes, they may either project to people that they should go through divorce in a more acrimonious or adversarial way, which I think can really be a powerful negative influence, which is something to be really careful about.
In your latest blog, you say you'll need to see past all the stereotypical generalisations bandied about regarding divorce and understand there could be a variety of ways on how your divorce might work out. So the stereotypical generalisations, are you meaning couples at war with each other?
Yes, kind of like couples at war, kind of getting into sort of perhaps being encouraged into a kind of battle mentality, that somebody's in the wrong, that somebody's to blame. That there can be situations where that does exist, but there can be situations where there's been an unhealthy relationship for some time that both people have been working on, and there's not a solution to it. That the solution is to perhaps part ways and move forward. So, it, like all human life, it's really complex in all the different shades, and it's trying to kind of understand that, I think.
Now, you're called a McKenzie Friend. That's what you're involved in. Your group that you work with. And what are McKenzie Friends?
Well, yeah, if I can explain that. So I'm a divorce coach and a McKenzie Friend. And a McKenzie Friend is a particular role that is established in English and Welsh family courts, and what it's based on a kind of test case that was two parents who were called McKenzie, who were getting divorced, and one of them argued in court that they couldn't afford legal representation and that they felt that they had a right to have somebody present with them in court to give them emotional support, to quietly give them advice, and to support them to present their own case when they couldn't afford a solicitor or barrister. So the name McKenzie Friend has then become established within the court system as a recognised kind of term. What that means is that as a McKenzie Friend, I don't represent people. I help them present their own case. So I'm there to quietly advise them, support them to try and figure out what their aims are and how to try and best achieve that. But I cannot and don't have permission of the court to speak to a judge. Because that's a right of audience that is granted to solicitors and barristers. So, and I think you mentioned earlier, perhaps, the distinction is I'm a sort of sole individual who's a McKenzie Friend. I don't belong to an organisation, so I'm a sole individual who kind of.
So you're not part of there's a UK network.
There are a number
set up by Philip Kedge?
No, I'm not part of that. There is a number of people out there who are trying who have websites that are almost like affiliate websites, whereby they are kind of collectively organising McKenzie Friends. And they're trying to sort of be a central place for such people. So
we'll have to make it clear then at the end of the programme where people can find you.
Sure, certainly. Yeah.
I put in search and I came up with all kinds of friends, friends I didn't know I had.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So then it is very interesting that you can do it yourself, provided you've got the knowledge, you've got information in front of you. When it gets very, very difficult, then you've got to seek help, haven't you?
Well, that's right. I mean, I think, like you say, when you've got the knowledge, I think one of the things that I really focus on is trying to explain how family courts work to people so that they understand that it's quite often shrouded in mystery, because quite often it's perhaps being explained in the legal language called legalese. So quite often people don't quite understand the nuances of that. And so knowledge is one part of it. If you understand what you've got to do, then you can be calmer when you go to court, and you're better prepared for the process if you understand what's coming ahead. Obviously, you've got the emotional challenges of standing up, talking about your own family in a courtroom to an authority figure. And, that's quite challenging for a lot of people. And so that's a big aspect of how I support people, is really helping people cope with that.
So, they say at the moment that the strain of putting on the perfect Christmas, along with money troubles and the festive break, can make, it can just make people just explode almost. But what is really worrying are the statistics at the moment, that 42% of marriages end in divorce. That's a really high number, isn't it?
That is, yeah. I mean, that is quite a significant kind of figure, isn't it? Yeah.
Very. And then 62% are a petition of the wife. So is it usually the wife that goes for it?
It's difficult to know, really. I mean, I wouldn't say that's typical of the people that I support, but I'm not convinced necessarily that whoever's the petitioner is a particularly big dynamic thing. Really, in courts separate certain aspects of divorce into separate processes, and the person who petitions, I don't think it's a really strong factor to be the one who's positioning, and that, you know, I would encourage people not to perceive it like some sort of, I'm doing this to somebody and I'm kind of, you know, I'm doing this and I'm proving to the rest of the world that this didn't work. I think it's not a very helpful kind of concept to kind of take on board when you're going through that process. I think ultimately, if there's two adults who no longer consensually want to be in a relationship, or if one of them doesn't want to be in a relationship, then that's essentially what a court's interested in, if the relationship's no longer going to work.
Now, I do know quite a lot of marriages that fail after just a couple of years, you know, and that is really alarming. But according to, once again, the facts and figures at the moment, it seems to be that around the 20th anniversary seems to strike a bit of a nasty note. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get that far.
I think I made it to about the 13th. Unlucky for some.
Yeah.
But yes, it is really, really, really tricky, difficult time. So when people seek you out, they can be pretty shell-shocked, can't they?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I think that's a good description, really. I think quite often people don't know what to do. Sometimes people are contacting me and they're responding to a court application that they're dealing with, or quite often I'm helping a lot of parents who are being prevented access to their children following a divorce. I do help quite a lot of fathers who perhaps left the family home and who are not being allowed to see their children at all, and then are kind of faced with what do they do to kind of rectify that situation if the other person is preventing that.
Yes, it is a very difficult time when children are used as a bit of a weapon.
Yes, I mean, it's very emotionally charged and challenging for people, and I think it's one of those things that really cuts to the centre of any person, really. Their relationship with their children is a huge kind of emotional soft spot, you know, for anybody, really.
And, you know, the separation, at the moment, the financial aspect, quite often marriages break up because of a financial issue. Mm-hmm. Maybe the other person is running away from a build-up of financial problems, which actually are made worse by the divorce. Yeah,
you've got that challenge, and you've got, like you mentioned earlier, you know, this time of year with Christmases and the pressures of families perhaps overspending on Christmas budgets, and or budgets throughout the year might have built up. Those things can very definitely put a strain on a family, and then if you have to go through a divorce, you've got to kind of see if you can find a way amicably to financially separate. And if not, you might have to go through a particular court process to get the court to either influence you or make a decision on what the financial solution is going to be.
Now, in your blog, you say, as a divorce coach and qualified mentor, I'm interested in helping people as early as possible in the process so they can avoid the added stress of high legal bills and focus their energies on the new era of parenting that beckons. So, do you actually get the two people together?
No, not at the moment, really. It's a kind of one-to-one approach I have, really, trying to chat through with people about how they perceive the lie of the land in their particular separation situation is, helping them identify maybe what are their real long-term aims that they would like, and what softer kind of options are there for trying to achieve a positive outcome. Because in an ideal world, you know, you don't want to go down the adversarial court route, but in some situations, that will be possibly the only way to resolve something. But in an ideal world, if I would be able to kind of get somebody early enough in the process and share with them some of the experience I have about how court works, it might give them a few different ways of thinking to reconsider, because quite often I find people have unhealthy preconceptions of what court might be like or what might happen, and if those preconceptions are wrong, then they may make uninformed kind of decisions.
What are the preconceptions a lot of people have then?
Well, I think they can have preconceptions that it's going to be really complicated, it's going to be really expensive, and it's going to be this incredible battle. And I think quite often when people think of court, they straight away jump to all their associations with watching TV dramas of seeing criminal courts, when actually we're talking about civil courts and civil matters. But I think those associations are very powerful in terms of, people feel that they're going to be on trial. People feel that they're, under this great big light of scrutiny. And I think that it's those kind of emotive connections that really kind of jump in for a lot of people, and then they get in a brain fog and they don't quite know what to do.
Well, we'll find out more about what they should be doing after the next bit of music from your... you've got a really interesting mix of music, and one that I really liked, I heard it and hadn't heard it before, was the artist for Hero, Les Fleurs. What is that? How would you describe that sort of music?
I think this is actually a cover version of an old Minnie Riperton song, and so who's like an old soul singer, and so it's a cover version, and I just it's a really kind of beautiful kind of song. So I thought it would be
very nice to kick off the new year with this. And just to remind you, this is Carla Delaney on Marlow FM 97.5, and this is Mid-Morning Matters, and we're talking about divorce, separation, the things that we're trying to take the pain out of it, and Graham is very well versed at doing just that. So please stay tuned for more information from him. Well, that is it. It's Carla Delaney on Mid-Morning Matters talking to Graham Fletcher, and we're talking about divorce, how it doesn't need to be nasty. You can actually work your way through it if you keep calm. So, Graham, when people first come to you, I imagine they're far from calm.
Quite often alarmed, frustrated, upset, looking for some support on kind of how to gather their thoughts and progress calmly. So fortunately I'm a very calm, kind of centered person, and I really quite like the challenge of getting somebody kind of settled and then actually going, listen, how can I kind of help you figure out how you want to go forward? So I quite enjoy that kind of process.
I know that the legal people, the legal eagles out there, they try and deal with it by saying, we don't want to know all the nasty stuff. I mean, obviously there are some people where there's been quite a nasty affair going on, and it's possibly still going on, and then there's financial matters, and it's terrifying, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really kind of diverse kind of spectrum of situations out there, and sometimes I feel very blessed for my own life when I hear about what other people are going through, because sometimes people have got some really difficult stuff that they're having to deal with as well. So it can be really challenging. I kind of understand that. I mean, courts are very matter of fact kind of places, so sometimes being very specific and clear about certain issues is kind of important, and sometimes the emotions are not going to help the process if the process has to go through a court process.
I like this section in your book. It reminds me of some advice that I was given, which is, this says, check in with yourself as to how you're coping on any given day, and doing this regularly can help you figure out if the process is moving forward productively and what you could do to help it progress. This will be an invaluable skill to practice over the coming months, and will be an essential aspect of achieving a successful outcome, whether through family court or through more amicable ways. That's very sound advice.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I think when I was writing this book, my main driver was that when I went through a divorce, I couldn't find a book that kind of gave you that information, that gave you some guidance and asked you questions to enable you to sort of pause and calm down. I was buying a number of books to try and educate myself as to how family courts worked, and I couldn't find anything. So after years of experience helping hundreds of clients, I thought, actually, it's for me to write the book and get this information out there. And I really thought about that headspace that I was in when I was going through my divorce, and I thought, actually, if this book can be read by other people and have real value for them, that would be great. And I was really pleased. The other week I had my first review on Amazon, and somebody said that it was so good that they read it twice in one weekend, and I was really touched by that. It was really meaningful to read that. So,
that's lovely.
yeah,
lovely to hear. I remember somebody telling me that there's a lot of frightening, horrible things maybe to come, but take every day a step at a time. Don't look too far ahead, because otherwise it can be quite frightening.
Yeah, I definitely think. I mean, I think when you're going through a divorce, it can feel emotionally really tricky. I think I remember at the time it almost felt like it was like a contagious virus that maybe other people didn't feel comfortable about talking about in case they said the wrong thing or they upset you further. And I remember once going out after work to a kind of pub with some friends, and there was somebody there who anecdotally mentioned that I was going through a divorce, and all of a sudden this complete stranger started negatively prophesizing, oh, this is going to go dreadfully wrong for you, this is what happened to me, and so therefore, just by association, because it happened to me, it's going to happen to you. And I remember, from a mindset point of view, saying to myself, actually, no, I'm going to not be like you at all. No offence or disrespect to your situation, but this is not going to happen to me. And I do believe, on a mindset level, that was really important for me in how I got through that process and that time of my life.
Probably that's why you've written this little paragraph here. Many people going through the end of a relationship can slip into a pattern of being reactive to the actions of the other person, and therefore are not proactive in making forward-thinking decisions. It's natural to seek support from friends and family, and in many cases that will be key to you sharing how you feel, help you work through your emotions, and consider what your options could be. I remember actually trying to shield my family from some of the stuff that was going on.
Yeah,
I didn't
sure.
want to frighten them.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it's a really difficult thing that you're kind of going through at that time, and everybody has different relationships with different friends and family, and certain people will support you in certain ways, and certain people might feel uncomfortable about supporting you in different ways, or you might even, like you say, shield people from it, or think, well, I don't want to burden people with that, or I don't know quite what to say. So I mean, it is a really emotionally challenging period of time to get through, and you have to kind of trust your intuition a lot, I think, to get through that to a positive outcome.
I like this other little tip of yours. It's crucial to recognise that whoever offers you advice will not be the person to live with the consequences of any decisions you make. So it's what you were saying earlier. There's lots of people out there who give sort of advice, but they're not the ones who are going to have to live with it.
Well, exactly. I mean, some of those people giving those bits of advice, you have to assess whether or not those people are best placed. What kind of have they got a successful relationship history that you admire, and you think that they're people who have got great decision making skills on a relationship level, or it could be that they're somebody who there's some emotional reaction underneath that just seems to be one which is a get back at somebody mentality. And I would always encourage anybody I support to try and look at things differently, and to think about planting seeds. What little actions can you do? One of my favourite visualizations that I like to share with people is I ask them if they've seen the magician David Blaine, who is quite well known for doing a levitating trick, which he used to be on television for doing, and I ask them if they've seen that kind of trick, and I sort of say to them, if you're going through a divorce right now and you receive a communication from your ex-partner and you perceive it to be a ball of energy, almost like some tumbleweed, and it might be potentially some negative tumbleweed. If it's coming towards you, just visualize that you can levitate, you lift yourself up above that bit of tumbleweed, you let it blow underneath you, and then you just lower yourself back down to the ground, and you think, well, I'm moving forward to a more positive outcome. I'm going to think about every little energetic decision like that. And I think quite a lot of my clients find that little visualization tool really helpful.
That is a really good one. I like that one particularly.
And it's quite good to also think of having special powers and being magic and strong,
yes.
Through the divorce, really. So.
That's interesting. You should mention the word strong. In a lot of cases, one person feels strong and the other one feels weak, and the weak one feels they just can't do anything.
Well, there's definitely loads of dynamics like that. Where quite often when I'm supporting people through a process, they may be. In some ways, I like to think that I'm lending them some of my strength. That they may be somebody who feels that that they're not quite so strong going through that process at the moment, and they just want a kind of a friendly advocate to kind of support them. And so a lot of the work I do is about developing relationships with people and figuring out what kind of support they want, what their kind of support needs are, and because ultimately, if I walk away from a client, they're the people living their lives, not me. So I have to support them to empower themselves to figure out what they want to do.
I've just picked up one little bit of advice here, because I was thinking that poor communication is often the key to things that can go even nastier. And I'm thinking of people texting, messages rather than picking up the phone and actually speaking to each other. Yeah. Do you actually encourage people to speak to each other on the phone or face to face? I mean, how?
Well, I think when you mentioned texting, I think I would always encourage people to be wary of text. I think people always have this emotional connection to text, that something must be responded to within a particular time scale, and I don't think that's a particularly helpful kind of thing if you're going through those early stages of divorce. I think maybe thinking about writing an email and then being able to go, right, well, I'll maybe put that email on hold for a day so that I can read it tomorrow to double check it, so that you're just taking stock to think, am I being reactionary to that? Because sometimes you can kind of cool things down or see things with different eyes the next day.
And is it worth actually showing that email to somebody, or the proposed email to somebody, a friend that might be able to help you? You can
do, yeah. Sometimes quite a fair bit of my work is sometimes my clients the other person in the divorce may have a solicitor, and so sometimes they're asking me to review communications that they've got from a solicitor to that they either don't understand the wording or they find the tone intimidating, and they're trying to gather their thoughts. So there's definitely sometimes getting other people's sort of insights, if you feel that you trust those people to kind of be coming from the same perspective as you, will be helpful. And
you think that at this sort of time people should resist taking to the likes of Facebook? I'm sure there are other websites like it, but I suppose that is a location where people will offer their opinions, won't they?
Well, I think the great difficulty with particularly Facebook is that you can get people who are going through difficult times, genuinely hurtful times, which I'm very empathetic to. But sometimes if you're expressing that on Facebook, you may suddenly then find loads of people that wading in with even more intense views that might be misinformed. There can be situations where grown-up children can see comments that things can quite quickly become out of your control on social media, and it's there to be photographed and gathered, and I don't really think it's a helpful dynamic at all. So I encourage most people to go, right, I'm going to have a social media rest for a while, and I think that can be very helpful.
Then, you give examples in your book of successful outcomes and, having a change in outlook. I'm thinking of the couple or the person that thought that they weren't going to get the access to the children that they thought, and it was changing your mindset can help. Shall I remind you which one that was?
Yeah, no, I think I remember the situation you're talking about, and I think there was a parent I was supporting who was fairly limited and restricted in the access that they had to seeing their son, and I think this person was so used to this, almost like within a year of divorce, that had become so conditioned and found it so difficult to try and move the situation on and improve it, that when he was thinking about going to family court to improve it, and family courts break things down into, you make an application that's specifically about child arrangements, but he was influenced by some other people to think it was going to be a really long, drawn-out process. And so on a mindset level, I encouraged him to go, well, listen, whilst there's a history of this situation not improving, don't preconceive that it's going to be complicated. And he was able to put aside the influence of other people who'd influenced to think like this, and actually, because the situation was being dealt with in family court, we were able to drastically resolve everything at the first hearing outside the courtroom before we'd even gone in to see the judge, which is quite often one of the dynamics that does happen at family courts. And I think it's a kind of powerful thing, because people don't like to go to court. There's a big emotional connection to that. So I think quite often there's nuances to this whole process that people need to understand that can, that was fantastic. That person went away with a positive outcome in just one hearing.
And the tip there that you've given is, I'd encourage you to take time to write down on paper how you want your family future to look, especially if children are involved. That is really important, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think because, of the strong emotions that you were mentioning earlier, and I think when you're going through a challenging time, sometimes you might feel that you can't see the wood for the trees, and there might be things going on that you're emotionally reacting to. And there could be other people around you encouraging you to think negatively or be reactionary. And I think taking yourself away from outside influence and just going, you know what is it I would love to have in the future? What kind of positive things would I like to sit back and go, oh, I've just achieved this, and here I'm thinking of, an improved relationship with an ex-partner. If you have younger children, and in 10 years' time, are you going to be able to have a face-to-face conversation with mum or dad, and look back and go, things have drastically improved? That would be a fantastic outcome for your children.
Yeah, because unfortunately, the divorce might be this year, but the ramifications of it are lifelong, aren't
Absolutely. It's going to affect any children's kind of future adult relationships, isn't it? Their perceptions of how men and women are, what is a relationship norm, all those kind of really fundamental things that really influence people. You need to be really careful about.
Well, I feel good, and that's exactly what you want people to feel, isn't it, when they've been to see you?
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate feel-good track by James Brown. I think it's difficult not to have a smile on your face when you hear that song, and I think when you're kind of going into the new year, if things are difficult in your life, then it's good to try and tap into whatever positive energy you can.
And music actually can play an important part when you're feeling down or
Absolutely,
want to
yeah.
cheer yourself up.
Yeah.
Bit of music.
If you choose the right music, some music can be melancholy and depressing as well, depending on your mood. So you've got to choose the right thing.
Now, your music tastes are quite interesting. Tell me a little bit about that.
I did tame it down a little bit in terms of the music I sent you, because I suddenly realised when I was sending you a playlist as to my music tastes aren't massively commercial. So
there's artist Moody Man.
Okay, yeah.
And then there's artist Domu too.
Yeah,
I don't know them at all.
No, I'm very into sort of a lot of instrumental dance music. I really like rhythm and texture and melody, and since I was a child, I've always really enjoyed dancing. So I have a big collection of dance music, and I DJ as well. And
where do you DJ?
There's a couple of small festivals that I DJ at in the summertime, and so there's one called Audio Farm, and there's another one called Free Rotation that I've DJ'd at on one occasion. So I'm kind of I'm a little bit of a train spotter. Sometimes people kind of say that about music. I'm very passionate about music.
Well, I like your passion. It's nice to be able to have different things to play.
Indeed.
On Marlow FM, and we're always very open to that. We do give our guests the opportunity to select music, and it's lovely. I do enjoy that. So, going back to our topic and the book Eyes Wide Open, can you remind us how people can actually get your book?
Well, they would just go on Amazon. The book's on Amazon, and as a Kindle ebook at the moment. It's just about to be published as a paperback as well, but there seems to be some teething problems actually getting Amazon to finally action the paperback. But I've got a couple of draft copies, the one that you're looking at. So hopefully that'll be out. And I've still got to really get an idea of the book market as to whether or not people are looking for a physical book, or you've got audiobooks nowadays as well. I'd quite like to record an audiobook. I quite like listening to audiobooks in the car when I'm driving. So I
think that could well be a really good thing. So when people are driving along, and they can hear something, or just sometimes when your mind is so cluttered, it's full, you can't actually read anything. I found that.
Well, I think in this modern day and age, when people are commuting to work, and I think having a book that you can listen to is great. And I think there's a few books that I've read that when you hear somebody narrate something, it feels like you're almost having a conversation with somebody, doesn't it? If somebody's talking, and it comes across as a bit more heartfelt with an audiobook. So it's definitely something in the new year that I will try and sit down and do a professional recording of the book as well.
Now, we are very aware that lawyers actually are doing their level best to try and stop it being adversarial, and a lot of them do have specialists within their services that deal with mediation, and they think that is a way forward. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I have personal experience of mediation being helpful at some point in my divorce, so I was quite grateful for that process. That happened via an independent mediation organisation that wasn't connected with a lawyer. And my experience looking back at that is that mediation can be great if two people are in the right emotional place to commit to something going forward, and they're going to stick to that, and they're both in a genuine place. I have heard stories about mediation not working for some people because one person just wants to walk in the room and for the other person to do exactly as they say, and it needs to be a mutually agreed a kind of approach. So mediation can work well if people are in the right place, but I think it can also present its challenges if something is agreed in mediation and then 4 weeks down the line there's a dispute and somebody kind of refuses consent, and it all kind of falls apart. It can become tricky.
Now, the other thing we've talked about, how there are parents, particularly men, who feel that they're being refused the right to see their children, and the children are being used a bit like a pawn in a game of chess, and a really ugly game sometimes. But the other issue is the finances. When it actually comes down to it at the end, it's all to do with who gets what and how. And the house is often the biggest worry.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a very difficult, emotive time for a lot of people, and people might have put in a particular share of a deposit when they first bought a property. People may have given up jobs to look after children, whether it's the mum or the dad. There can be all sorts of dynamics there whereby obviously if there's a situation where there's an established norm in a family and two people are no longer going to be together, then there's a whole uncertain future there that needs to be mapped out. And I think sometimes it can be really difficult to figure out the way forward if there's a jointly owned property and whether or not that can be sold or people want to sell it, and every situation is always unique, and there's always criteria that needs to be considered if you're looking at it from a court point of view, and but some of the considerations of those are quite broad and complex, so every situation is always unique, so it's always difficult to sort of give people clarity of answers as to how something's going to pan out.
Now, the next thing is the splitting of the goods, the furniture and all of that. Do you have to help out with that? Sometimes clients will seek a little bit of support on that. It's not a big feature really. I think more often than not, quite people can kind of agree some things. But I have heard some really quite negative stories about situations where either items were sold or destroyed, yes.
And it is saddening when you kind of hear situations.
I've heard
like
about
that.
the table that was cut in half,
oh, really?
And the cats Bubble and Squeak. They sadly weren't together at the end of it.
Yeah,
there are these things that happen.
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, I think sometimes I feel very blessed when I hear certain situations and I think, well, that hasn't happened in my life, and I feel blessed that hasn't, and I'm very sympathetic when you do hear these kind of horror stories, and it must be really challenging for those people to kind of figure out how to respond and how to cope in those situations.
And, you say you explain the court process to people. I mean, a lot of this legalese is terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, I think quite a few of my clients, when they kind of leave me feedback, they're quite often saying that, yeah, they find it challenging. I've had some clients say it. They found dealing with solicitors intimidating, because quite often I'm supporting people at court, and I'm there to either help decipher what the legalese is for them so that they can properly respond in their own way. And I think it is kind of challenging. I think it's a really powerful psychological thing when somebody talks to you and tells you you don't understand something. It kind of makes you feel uncertain, but actually quite often the concepts are quite simple, but they're using unfamiliar wording, which then gets you into a mindset where you don't understand, and maybe I should go along with what I'm being told. And I think it's something that I really encourage my clients to be aware of, so that they can actually sort of gather their thoughts and make an informed decision. And
also, when they're told that they've got to go to court, are they faced with a judge with a wig on and all the paraphernalia that you associate with a criminal court?
No. So I don't think I've ever seen a judge with a wig on in a civil court. But I think, like I said earlier, the experience of going to court is always quite worrying and intimidating, and a nervous situation for anybody, which is why I really enjoy helping people cope with that, because if they can be calmer when they go into courtroom, they can achieve a better outcome. So sometimes a lot of the work's kind of helping them gather their thoughts on paper, so that if they present a document to a judge called a position statement, that they've summarised all their thoughts on paper already, so they've got something in front of them to remind them what they want to say to the judge, and they've gathered clarity before they go to court, so that when the emotional decisions come up, they're better placed to calmly respond.
And I noticed on Chapter 5 you've got a section on key people of influence, and one of those sorts of people are, if there are children involved, an organisation called Kafka's Family Court Advisors come into play.
Yeah, I think when I was doing that chapter, I was kind of, I'm somebody who reads business books as well, and the idea of key people of influence is quite a well-known kind of idea, and I thought it was a good concept to kind of put out there in terms of court, who might influence you. And because I think sometimes, so Kafkas are the family court advisors that work within the court system, and they're social work trained, but their role within the family courts is to advise the court on what they think might be the right solution or way forward from a court point of view in child arrangement cases where there's a dispute about the time that a child might spend with one parent. So they're very influential, and developing a positive relationship with them could really influence the outcome. If you're going to court and you want to improve the situation for you, the amount of time that you're seeing your child, they will be a big influencing kind of factor. And I think quite often a lot of, again, like negative stereotypes, I quite often encounter a lot of men who will say, I've read this about Kafkas and therefore all these stereotypes happen in court, and and I think it's really not helpful. I think I've seen some really positive outcomes at court in terms of the influence that Kafkas have improved a child's situation, and they've got healthier relationships with the children.
And I gather that from what you say in this book, judges or magistrates can choose not to follow their recommendations if they have a different point of view on what is being presented to them. But it certainly helps if you've got somebody who knows their way around the system, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in a high percentage of cases, from what I have seen, the judges will agree with their advice, but I have on some occasions seen a judge kind of question and scrutinise their professional assessment. So it's not a kind of given, and so this is why it's really important to understand the nuances of family court, and to understand, that there can be micro details that can be hugely important and can really turn a whole situation around.
Then the other key people of importance are lawyers, solicitors and barristers. I mean, when barristers are involved, that can be quite a moment in somebody's life.
Absolutely, yes. I think I've supported clients to present their own case when the other person's had a barrister, and they've felt that was a challenge, but they've been able to do admirably and get some really positive outcomes. I had to do that in my own process, and I think it can feel a challenge, and you can feel way out of your depth. But I think once you kind of get over some of those things, I think a lot of it comes down to logic, common sense, child-focused thinking, and keeping your emotions in check. And
I think people should also realise that the judge isn't there to be nasty. In many cases, they're there to actually make sure your case is heard properly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a complex system, and I think judges are very often trying to figure out the right thing to do for the children, and I think there are definitely some cases that are really complex and must be really challenging to figure out what is the right thing to do. But I think the one thing I would like, the real focus of my book was trying to educate people that sometimes, whilst you might perceive court to be this very big significant thing, sometimes it can drastically change things for the positive. One example would be somebody who one summer only spent 3 days with their son, and then in one court hearing, the court ordered that went up to three weeks the summer afterwards, and at that time that parent struggled to think that would have been the outcome that would have been achieved because of the views of the other parent. So I think some fantastic outcomes can come out of this for children. And I think I always kind of walk out of court with a big smile on my face when I've been part of supporting that to happen.
That must be brilliant.
Yeah,
and then
really
Chapter 7, that's interesting. Expect out-of-court negotiations. So it's not all about that one day in court. There's a lot behind the scenes.
Very much so, yeah, definitely. So that's, I think, when if you've got someone like myself who can help you keep calm outside court and help look at the issues calmly, you can a lot of really positive things can happen outside the courtroom, because I think I mentioned earlier, that quite often these dynamics of, you've got a particular association about going to court, so a lot of people don't want to go back to court. Going to court on one situation's enough for most people, but and there's some unfortunate people who I've gone to repeated court hearings with, but sometimes that emotional reaction to court can influence a really positive kind of a conversation outside court. Maybe it's a back and forth kind of negotiation. So sometimes a short court hearing, you could be at court for 2 or 3 hours, and actually you've managed to discuss things positively and move forward.
And it must be very satisfying for you when you've got a really complex case that has, with your help, you've simplified it quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who, in kind of developing my business, I've been very focused on trying to build up online reviews, and every time I get a review from a client and they put in their own words quite how you've kind of supported them, it's fantastic when they pick up on certain nuances of little details that actually they'll go, that really helped that whole situation, because everybody's got different support needs, so it's not like everybody I support's going to need the same support, so it's everybody kind of requires different levels of support.
Now, you don't just do divorce, you do other things as well, don't you? It's part of your business.
Oh, yeah. Well, is this referring to...
Kinesiology.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I have a business called Just Feel Good, which is kind of, I suppose, inspired a little bit by that James Brown track. But Just Feel Good is a business that is... It's interested in the subconscious mind, your subconscious mind being the kind of operating system that runs your conscious thinking, and it's a topic I'm kind of fascinated with. And so kinesiology, muscle testing, is a technique whereby you can learn how to ask questions to your subconscious mind, and you get the answers via your physical body in terms of muscle responses.
Wow, that sounds really interesting.
It is fascinating.
Well,
I can tell you some interesting outcomes that I've supported some people
that would
with.
be good. Now, the other thing is you found yourself into kinesiology. Can you tell us what that is and how you got into that?
Okay, well, so yeah, kinesiology muscle test. So kinesiology is the process of asking yourself questions and using your body as something that gives you results, strong or weak. And so you can ask yourself a number of questions and your body will tell you strong or weak. Listeners, if they want to go online, could Google the phrase sway test. There's a test called the sway test, and my website's got some demonstrations of how to kind of do that. And I discovered it when I was sort of aware that I had certain blocks, and I saw a video of one of the techniques that I'm trained in, which is called Psy-K, which is I'm trying to think of the correct spelling, PSYCH-K, and I saw a demonstration of somebody who was giving a talk at a conference, and he was the founder of this technique, and he asked a volunteer to come up onto the stage and muscle test a particular statement that she wanted to believe consciously. And when he showed her how to muscle test this, she discovered that she didn't actually believe it at the level of her subconscious mind. And she was she thought, she was not particularly surprised, and she was interested in the idea that he said, well, if you don't believe that in your subconscious mind at the moment, would you like to save that into the hard drive of your computer system so that you do? And so she did, and he took her through that process. And as I watched it, I was just fascinated. I was like, I need to learn about that. And
you've helped people. I mean, there's this lady here. I've got one of the things, teeth grinding at night.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's my lovely. I'm trying to think of the relation. My ex-wife's sister. You might be able to help me out. I'm terrible with trying to figure out but I was talking to her about how I'd stopped a teeth grinding habit, and she said, "Oh, I'm interested," because she was wearing a gum shield at night for like 15 years and couldn't kind of stop that. And I said, well, do you want to try out this other technique, which is called the emotion code? And the emotion code, you ask questions to check whether there's an emotion connected with that symptom. And it turned out there was 5 trapped emotions, and within 20 minutes, we removed 5 trapped emotions using this technique. Then we asked the 6th time, was there another trapped emotion? And there wasn't. So the next morning, I kind of texted her and said, how did you get on last night with the teeth grinding? And she said, it's really weird. I've just woken up this morning, went to take the gum shield out to put it on the side of the bed, and it was gone. I'd spat it out and it was at the bottom of the bed. And for 3 nights in a row, the same thing happened, and she's never worn it since.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and it only took 20 minutes as well.
So you can kick all kinds of habits in.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose with New Year, people, have smoking things. Can it help with that?
Yeah, there's all sorts of applications and ways that you can use it. I've got a dear friend of mine called Simon. It's his birthday today, so if he's listening, I'd love to wish him a happy birthday, Simon. But he's somebody I've known for years who's a musician, and he's always struggled with creative blocks up until recently. And making really good music, but never seemed to have a confidence to kind of push it a bit further. And I was telling him about this, one of the techniques, and I said, do you want to save a new command into your operating system? And so he came up with this phrase that I find it easy to finish off music for vinyl release. And he muscle tested to see whether he believed that, and he didn't believe it in his subconscious mind. So we went through a process of saving that statement, and the outcome has been amazing for him. So he's now, since then, he's got about 5 releases signed to 5 different record labels that are well respected. His confidence and his workflow has gone through the roof, and he's really kind of shining, and that block is just removed, and he now really truly believes in his music making kind of skills, and it's amazing how it's changed his whole approach.
That is really interesting. Yeah. I mean, the mind is a fascinating thing, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's something that really fascinates me. I'm kind of I think nowadays, with computers being much more a bigger role in people's lives, I'm really interested in this idea of programming. Where does your programming come from? How can you adjust your own programming? And the fantastic thing with kinesiology muscle testing is that because you're asking yourself a question, and the theory is that your muscles are all connected to your subconscious mind, so that your muscles can't lie to you when they give you an answer. So you're able to get right to the kind of root files. And in some cases, if you've got a root file that is a negative one, you can almost pick that file up from the computer hard drive, dust it off, and put it back down and the emotional resonance is kind of removed. So there's amazing things that you can do, and rather than say talking-based therapies where you're talking out loud about things, where you could potentially re-traumatize yourself, you can actually just some of these techniques are fantastic in that people can address the root file, but without telling somebody else about it. So they don't have to, if they know there's a particular event, that they can kind of change that root file.
That is really interesting. As you say, a lot of these talking therapies just to rake up the old coals.
Well, I think there's I've done a fair bit of reading and research about this, and there was one book that I read that was really powerful. Somebody who'd had this really shocking kind of life experience, and how she was still alive. I was, it was a surprise, really, the level of abuse that she'd encountered. But she'd kind of met somebody who was a US government kind of almost mind control specialist, and he said to her, the way to heal is to not talk about this, and whenever you want to talk about it, write down everything in detail. And the magic process of writing the things out in handwriting transfers the memory from one area of the brain to another area of the brain. And she's written this amazing book called PTSD Time to Heal, which you can buy on eBay or for directly. And her name's Kathy O'Brien. And when you read her personal story, what she's recovered from is incredible. And she's written this fantastic book that is, to help Gulf War veterans and loads of people who've been through some traumatic stuff, and because the fact that she's recovered from what she has is incredible. So so I think she's got a really interesting personal insight there as to how she managed to self-heal herself. It's quite fascinating.
I can see why you found the opening on this one. So you don't need any technology, any equipment or anything for this?
No, I think your body is the technology. Your body is your physical body is connected to your kind of subconscious mind. So everything is there within you to self-improve and self-heal. I kind of truly believe, and it's just learning to take a step into the unknown and embrace that. Well,
you certainly seem to have done that. And I've been able to tell you about an event that's coming up, which is a divorce fair.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
I've found details of that. It's at Hilton London Olympia, Kensington High Street, and it's between Thursday the 20th of February and Saturday the 22nd of February. One of the sessions is midday, another at 6 o'clock, so you can find that online. And the organisers say there'll be information about finance, law, well-being and parenting, so you can find that one online. So how can people find you, Graham?
Well, they can visit my website, which is www.McKenzieFriendUK.com. And there's full information on there, or I've also got a business page on Facebook, or I'm on LinkedIn as well. And then my other kinesiology business is just-feel-good.com. I'm on Facebook as well. It's Just Feel Good.
Graham, have you got any final message for people?
Just be very, very positive. Number one tip is, if you're going through a divorce, is take time to look after yourself, your own mental health. Make some time just to slow down and check in with yourself emotionally, and just prepare yourself that there's a little journey there that you've got to go on, and think about how you can break it down into little parts rather than being overwhelmed by everything.
Well, I think that sounds some very sound advice. And have you got some events? Are you going to be putting on events to do with your book?
Yeah, well, at the moment, I haven't got any specific events. I'm kind of interested in getting out there. I'm just about to submit an article to the Divorce magazine about the book, and that will be interesting.
That's interesting. So there is a book, there is a magazine. I'm not aware of it, so you can find out about that on at the newsagent.
I don't think it's a physical magazine.
So
I think it's
online.
More like I could give you if you just let me grab up my email from the person who runs it, I could tell you.
If we don't have enough time to do that, I'm sure people can actually find it.
I think that it's the Divorce Magazine. You can find they've got a page on Facebook, and I think they've got an active YouTube channel. And in fact, the one thing I forgot to mention is a little free thing for people. I have a YouTube channel that's got over 7,000 views, so people can find free family kind of court advice on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. So that might be worth a look.
So do they just put your name in, Graham Fletcher?
Yeah, I think Graham Fletcher McKenzie Friend should take you straight there, and you can subscribe, and there's lots of bite-sized chunk videos that you can watch. And
you spell Graham, Graham.
Yeah, Graham. And then Fletcher, Fletcher.
Well, I am now going to thank Izanne for talking to me, and I thank Graham Fletcher for bringing in his book and for talking to me about how divorce doesn't have to be ugly. Yes. It can be okay if you've got to take it steadily and be sensible.